The podcast is named Destination Unknown unless I decide to change it.
Yeah.
Hence the Destination Unknown.
Okay, we finally did it.
We did it. I'm proud.
We're only running 35 minutes late.
That's okay.
Okay, so today
Yeah.
we have Grace Lawton on. She is a psychotherapist, and I'm super excited for this one because therapy over the past probably 2 years has been like a huge resource in my life and like really transformed my life. So
Yeah.
I really want people to just know what therapy is because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about therapy.
Yeah.
So let's just start it off by you introducing yourself and kind of like your expertise and all of that, and then we can dive into some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a psychotherapist. I'm actually a licensed clinical social worker. So there's a lot of different types of therapists out there. So there's like psychologists, there's licensed clinical social workers, there's licensed mental health counselors. All of them are really doing clinical psychotherapeutic work. It just kind of depends on what orientation you come from. So in social work, for example, we're really focused on like person and the environment and how like the systems and your communities would impact your mental health, rather than from like a psychological perspective, or if you're getting like a psychology degree, it's more so about like. Sometimes it can take a little bit of like a mental deficit approach of like, okay, what is what's absent here, or like what are we? Is it a little bit more tied to, I would say, like the medical model? I would say I think that's shifting as you know we are just like learning, and therapy is always changing, and like the field's always changing. But I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a private practice here in Austin. It's called GML Therapy. It's in downtown, and I work mostly with adults. So. Primarily, I do a lot of work with anxiety and a lot of relational work. So whether it's like familial relationships, dating and romantic relationships, friendships, really anything having to do with like human relations, like building relationship. And then I do a lot of work also with depression and trauma as well. So I work with adults and of like both genders, all genders, and I'm kind of, I guess, like some folks will like really specialize in like one identity. I don't really do that. Which I think is amazing because I love the diversity of the work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a little bit about my background. I do a lot of like integrative work. So you'll see like a therapist might say like, oh, I do like cognitive behavioral therapy, or I do like ketamine assisted psychotherapy, right? That's like a type. I do a lot of integrative work. So I've studied a lot of different modalities, and I kind of pull based on what's showing up in the space and what the client needs. Yeah.
Cool. So let's start like at the very basic level.
Yeah.
What is psychotherapy?
That's such a hard question to answer. I mean, like, there's like the definition of it of like, okay, psychotherapy is, treatment for emotional challenges, mental health conditions, et cetera. So there's that. But psychotherapy is such a broad term for so many different treatments, right? There's like behavioral psychotherapy, there's relational psychotherapy, there's psychodynamic psychotherapy. But I kind of like to think of it as like, I use this analogy a lot with clients who come in. So like, let's say you're a tree, and trees have roots, right? So let's say your roots they're vast. If you ever look at the bottom of a tree, they're going all different directions, and each root's going to have a different depth. There's like a strength in that root. Psychotherapy, what we do is, if you notice that something's off with the tree, like it's sick or it needs something's missing, and the tree is at risk of dying, right? Psychotherapy, what we do is we dive deep and we see what's causing that ailment.
Okay.
So let's say if we're taking this, like let's say if I'm the tree and I'm experiencing depression, right? That depression is going to be rooted in a variety of different things. It could be that I'm not physically taking care of myself. That might be one root. It could be that I'm predisposed. It could be our biochemistry. Like some of us we have all different neurological components, right? That make us who we are, and that could be part of it. It could be that I've had a trauma in my life, and that trauma is showing up now in adulthood in a way that's like creating depressive symptoms. But we're all these walking histories, and we have different like life experiences that have created how we operate day to day and what we're experiencing emotionally and physically and psychologically. So I think of therapy as like the action of going deep. It's exploring the roots of that tree so that we can make that tree very, very healthy, and also that you can grow in all the different branches and create the life that you want with all these different branches. So it's a very long-winded analogy.
No, I love that analogy because, like it's all kind of foundational, right? Like whatever we've all had all of these things happen to us or happen for us. Like it could be good, it could be positive, but whatever it is, when we're younger, like that's what's shaping our lives into today. So yeah, love that. Okay, so the goal of therapy. What would you say is the goal of going to therapy? Or that someone's trying to get out of it?
Yeah. I think it's really dependent, obviously, on the person coming into therapy. If I had to say, like, overarching what it is, I would say it's folks coming in to, like, solve emotional challenges and create a life that is the life most aligned with their values and life that's going to give them the most purpose. Yeah. Or, like, where they're fulfilling their purpose. I think that's hard, though, because someone might be coming in to do more exploratory work, build self-esteem, like they might feel listless, and like their goals are going to be so different than someone who's having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. Yeah. Right. Or someone who has a panic attack every time they have to drive on I-35, you know? Yeah. So it's so hard also to answer these questions in an elementary way, or like in a very basic umbrella term, because psychotherapy is so personal. Yeah. And each person is coming in with such specific goals, and even how I would approach that session will be so different based on those goals.
I gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know some people are more so looking to fine tune, and others are looking to, like you said, just get the tools to get out of bed. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I've personally used it as, I would say, I don't know, like I like to think that my shit was together, but I don't think my shit was together. And
totally.
Therapy really offered me that opportunity to just have a neutral party kind of steer me, because I think a lot of people think therapy is I go in and you preach to me for an hour. Yeah. And then I take your advice and then I move on. So like, would you mind clarifying
yeah, totally.
what that is?
No, absolutely. I think that's funny. When I think of misconceptions, there's like two on each end of the spectrum. The one that you're sharing right now, which is that we're like these all-knowing people that are going to give you all this advice that's going to change your life, when it's like we're human too. And like that is not our goal. And also, I wouldn't want a client of mine to just solely take my perspective. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to help you figure out what's going to be best for you. It's aligned with your values, what you want, not what I want. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. That's not what we do. In fact, I think oftentimes I'm talking immensely less than my client is. Like my client's talking and sharing and kind of carving the path to where we're going to go. My job is to help them, like, to offer a different perspective, to ask reflective questions, to ask the questions they're not getting anywhere else. They're not getting from their family. They're not getting from their friends. They're not like able to ask themselves. And then also be like a sounding board, to like a tool to help them reflect. But it's funny because I think on the flip side, a lot of people also believe that therapy is like, okay, I'm going to come and I'm going to talk at you for like,
a venting session.
Yeah. Or like I have friends. I don't need to come to therapy because I have them to vent to. And I'm like, well, there's kind of what I'm going back to about like it being, or what you said, being a neutral party. Our friends and our family all have biases in our life. Like like if you're trying to decide something that for yourself, like everyone in your circle is going to have a bias based on like caring about you and knowing you. And the type of care and love that a therapist has for their client is shaped on really focusing on you and what you want and like your primary interests.
Right. And it's just like hard on friendships in general. I've noticed myself personally complaining or venting a lot less to my friends ever since I've started going to therapy. Yeah. Because it's just like a space that's carved out. Not like you said, you're not there to like vent. Yeah. But you are there to kind of figure shit out, and you can do that in a safe place and tell them, because let's be honest, when we're talking to our friends, we're leaving out like certain details.
Oh yeah.
Because we want them to be on our side, right?
Totally.
Like, well, I want you to be on my side. But yeah, so I think that that's been a really great part of therapy too, is you can be 100% honest.
Yeah.
And that's when you're going to get the most value too. Like you can't, I mean, you can, but we probably shouldn't be framing these stories to make ourselves look good when we're paying good money to get the opinion or guidance of a trained therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you said too, we also will sometimes like choose the friends that we speak to based on what our issue is to get the answer that we want. And a therapist, I have so many clients that'll come in and be like, I know what you're going to say about this, because they're like kind of asking themselves the questions now, or like they've noticed like they're going to certain friends or certain family members for certain things to hear what they want to hear. And like a good therapist is going to not tell you what you want to hear, but like ask you the questions to really do the self-reflection to really make the choice that's aligned with your values.
Yeah.
I always think of the example of like, let's say you're deciding to have kids or not. Like your parent is going to have feelings about that.
Yeah.
Your friends are going to have feelings about that based on their own experience of like making that decision or not for themselves.
Yeah.
But a therapist, I have no stake on whether you do or you do not, right? My only stake is that you're going to make the decision that's going to be the right choice for you, right? So it's a kind of an interesting example that can tie into like a variety of life choices, like entering or ending a relationship, all of these things.
Yeah.
So not only do we not want to like feel like we're over relying on friendships for that, it's also like your friendship or your friends unfortunately cannot give you the unbiased third party perspective that a therapist can. And also with the training to, you know, ask the questions that are actually help you instead of ones that are going to maybe make things a little bit more confusing.
Right. Because if you're a parent and you want to be a grandparent, then maybe you could manipulate. It is the word, manipulate your child into having kids.
Totally.
Or if your friends, like if you're miserable as a person and your friend is like kind of on the rocks, you could be like, oh, I kind of want them to be single too. Now we can go out together. And
yeah, I see that all the time. I work with a lot of folks in their 20s and 30s. And I feel like that's something they're like, well, I spoke to my friend about this, what happened in the relationship. And I'm like, but your friend has a whole history of relationships informing their opinion.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with yours.
Right.
Know?
Yeah. So it kind of brings up like an interesting point too that I was talking to someone about last week.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people get like to a certain level with their therapist where maybe they're like texting outside of work and stuff like that, where they just have worked together for 6-7 years and you start having like this pretty close bond.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something to be aware of? And should you like, well, yeah, what are kind of your thoughts on all of that? Like being close with your patients? Yeah,
that's a really good question, because I feel like it's like, where does that bring us with like the bias point of view?
Yeah.
There's professional and ethical boundaries we have as a therapist, and we take licensing exams, and when you have a license, you are like in a contract, you know, of like, I'm going to uphold these ethical boundaries. And part of that is the nature of our relationship with clients. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the hardest things as a therapist, because like you have such deep care and love for your patients.
Yeah.
Like I love my clients. I think it's an immense privilege to work with them. And there have been times where like someone will come in and be like, I really wish I could be your friend. Like you are an awesome person. I like feel such a values alignment with you. I think you're doing incredible things and I wish I could be your friend, but that's not an avenue that's open to us. And it wouldn't be helpful for you or for me for that to be the case. That being said, I think different therapists have different ways of like communicating and different levels that they feel comfortable with. Like texting outside, that could also be part of the work, like depending on, you know, the nature of the relationship. Now, if someone's texting like, let's go hang out,
right,
that's an ethical boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would say like that is getting into a territory of like, you're kind of blurring the lines there.
Yeah.
So I think what you're highlighting is like, okay, where is that line? And it's laid out for us, you know, in our code of conduct. But
yeah, or even just like, I would just imagine for myself, it would be really hard if I had seen someone 5 years weekly and I it would be hard not to be friends with them and then start having that bias where you're like, oh, you're too good for them. Or even on their end, even on a patient's end, we could start telling you what we want to tell you because it is more of a friendship at this point. So yeah, it's just a thought that popped into my head when you were talking about biases.
No, I think that's really important too. But I would also argue, like, if you're feeling in the session that it's more of a friendship, to me, that's a red flag in your therapeutic relationship. Because if you're coming to session, and not that you shouldn't have a friendly rapport and a love for one another.
Yeah.
But the therapeutic relationship is really different than a friendship.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you're feeling like that's shifted and you're feeling more like your therapist is your friend, I would have a conversation with your therapist about that. And I would bring it up in session and I would put that on the table because there might be like some blurred lines there. And it's so hard because like, yeah, you've talked to someone every week for 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of my own therapist previously, I loved her. But I also will say that I also liked the fact that there was boundaries there because it made the environment safer.
Yeah.
And I feel like if those lines are blurred, then it's kind of taking out the safety of the holding environment of therapy that is like so critical to doing the work.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. So with today's world, there's obviously a lot of anxiety and depression. I think it's probably being diagnosed at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think we have a lot to be anxious about right now, unfortunately, if we think about our environment changing. I mean, the world today is not, there's multiple things. The world today is not the world we lived in, 40 years ago, right? Like the tech boom, the access we have to everything, our childhood is shorter than ever. I feel like we're exposed so much more, which is going to increase anxiety. I also think part of it is that now this field and like even these diagnoses were it's really relatively new that we're doing this. Like it's the field itself is, if you look at other medical fields or like treatments, like this is still a relatively new field. Like the depth of exploration that has been done for like other medical needs is way vaster and has been happening for way longer than mental health.
Yeah.
So I think one, we're almost like playing catch up, and in that now we're like, oh my God, all of this is anxiety.
Yeah.
I think two, there's a lot to be anxious about, and things are being thrown at us in this world that there's like no guide map. There's certain things that have been for forever, like grief. Humans have experienced grief since the start of humanity, but like things like that have come up from like the tech world of like comparisons starting from a very young age in a very like constant in your face way.
Only seeing the good.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. And even like, I just feel like the like career pressure and just like there's so much opportunity with that. I think comes more anxiety as well.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm with you. I think just having so much information. I mean, before we even get out of bed, we could see 5,000 things that we would have never saw 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because you can just flip over. You scroll through TikTok. I mean, it's easy to go through 100 TikToks in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Instagram, Twitter. So now you know that, there was a shooting like all these things. It is a lot.
It is.
It's a lot of overload.
Totally. And also you're seeing like a lot of things you wouldn't have seen before, right? Like, and some of it's really good and positive and heartwarming, and like for example, like what you're doing, like trying to put like positive messaging out into the world, or like education, right? But there's also a lot of like darkness and challenging things that we are exposed to, and our brains can't always decipher. Like if we're watching something on our phone and it's like disturbing or challenging to witness, our brains can't always decipher what's real and what's not real.
Like deep down.
Yeah. So like, let's say you're watching something or you're hearing something horrific that has happened, right? Like what we used to watch, like on the news, like 1 hour of the day, we're getting constantly, and your brain can't decipher in that moment, like, oh, this isn't happening to my nervous system right now, like in reality. So it's like, you're getting these like bursts of distress that you then have to regulate. And if you can't regulate them right away, it's like, okay, then this is going to build up over time. And then now we're dealing with depression. Now we're dealing with anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to pick your brain on this.
Yeah.
As far as, so anxiety was obviously in our bodies because if a tiger's coming and it's going to attack us, we can maybe sense it and get away, right? Like, so there was a time when anxiety was good. Do you think because life has gotten quote unquote so easy in the sense of we have shelter, we have food, we have all of this, do you think our brain is also looking for something to worry about?
It's a really good question. I think if you are predisposed to having, or if you experience anxiety at a really high level or a high rate, then yes. I always like to say like emotions love themselves. So I will say like if you have anxiety, like there will be kind of like a buildup with that. So like, okay, like I'll say I'm having anxiety about this meeting at work. Like then you're like, okay, well, like how am I going to get to the meeting? Like what if I get in a car accident when I go to the meeting? Like if I get in a car accident, like how am I going to fix my car about finances? Now I'm having financial anxiety, right? Like emotions love themselves. I think it's interesting when you're talking about the switch, because I personally think that anxiety is a helpful emotion, whether we're back in the days where like a tiger's going to eat us, or we're in the days of like, I got an uncomfortable email from my boss and I don't know what's going to happen. Anxiety is helpful, right? It's just that is the proportion of the anxiety fitting to the facts of like the situation.
Yes.
So I feel like when you're saying like, is our brains like looking for things to be anxious for or about, I think if that's something that you're experiencing, is like I feel like my brain's constantly like seeking something to be anxious about, that would be a sign like it might be helpful to seek help with that, like to see a therapist. But I think it's just a matter of like what cues us day to day has changed. Like now I don't have to worry about the tiger. I just have to worry about, my current life situation. Yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. Like, I mean,
yeah.
But it's tough to say like our problems are easier or less important than a tiger because it's really all we know. Like we've never had the threat of a tiger killing us. So our threat of a tiger killing us might be I get fired or like, if you zoom all the way out, it's not near as bad as getting attacked by a tiger. But does our body know that? Does our brain know that? I don't know. Like,
well, I think what you're hitting the nail on the head there is like your body is going to and your brain's going to respond to what's in front of you. And then the intensity and duration will be different, like based on the situation. It's when like the intensity or duration, like I think that's a really good like thing to check in with ourselves is like, okay, is the intensity and duration of my emotion about this fitting the facts of the situation? And if not, then like what's going on there? Because if you see a tiger, like, okay, if a tiger's going to attack me, like my emotion fits the facts here, right? Like
we better run.
Yeah, exactly.
This would be a good opportunity to run.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll see something like our job is a part of our livelihood, right?
Yeah.
So for fear of getting fired might instill that fear, like, the same level of intensity, but then we have to kind of take a step back and decipher. But it's a really good question, I think, and one that I think, unfortunately, because, well, hopefully we'll never have to answer.
Yeah. I would prefer not to.
Yeah, but
I would prefer not to answer that one.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing that's like, that I'm really trying to accomplish with this podcast is opening men's eyes to therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my male friends go to therapy, but I know there's still kind of that stigma out there. What would you say to younger men or men of any age when it comes to therapy and like if they have any stigmas about it?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would like to ask is like, okay, where is that stigma coming from? Like kind of taking that analogy back to the tree of like, where's the root of it? Is it fear? Is it shame? Is it like a belief that you have based on like what someone that was taught to you at a young age that society reinforces? Unfortunately, I think there's some effort there to release that stigma, but it's happening at a nice slow pace, as
Yeah.
it always does. But I would say, like, I think it's really helpful to one, see where that's coming from. And I think two, like, a little bit of like, do it anyway. Like, if you're feeling shame about it, just like do it anyway, try it. If you're feeling fear about it, do it anyway, try it. Because you won't really know about how it's going to impact you until you try it.
Yeah.
That being said, I will say I have immense empathy for whether it's coming from a place of like a core belief about therapy or fear or shame about it, because I do think that there are systems and societal norms in place right now for men that make it particularly challenging.
Yeah. And like what things are you talking about?
Well, I think that, like, it was interesting. I was watching a reel about, and Brene Brown was sharing that, she was sharing a conversation that she had with a attendee of like one of her talks, and he asked her, like, you know, what has your research said about men and their work, and she does a lot of work in vulnerability. I was talking about like men and their willingness to be vulnerable, and she said, you know, a lot of my research was not focused on men. And he said in reply, like, that's so convenient. And he was sharing that, you know, there's all this discussion about vulnerability, but there's so much in our world that reinforces the message that men should not be vulnerable. And not just from other men, also from women in their lives. So he was discussing with her, like, you know, if you have a relationship and you kind of have the societal norms in a heterosexual relationship, there is pressure on the male figure in that relationship to kind of be this like stoic, strong presence. And yet we don't expect that of the woman in the relationship. The woman's kind of has more, there's like an allowance or more space to be emotional and vulnerable. And I think that dynamic that he was explaining is kind of permeates into the world.
Yeah.
Of like, there is a message that like you can only be vulnerable in certain spaces if you're a man.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear your take on it, obviously, because I have a limited perspective as a woman.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I would say that for me, I used to be very vulnerable and open, but I do honestly believe it affected my romantic relationships because, and I'll be, you know, self-aware here. I think I was overdoing it.
Okay.
So it was probably just like a lot.
Yeah.
Because I just was really trying to figure it out, and I really enjoyed talking about it. Like, enjoyed talking about my feelings and figuring all that out. But what I would say is, I think there's a very nice balance of understanding your emotions. Here's where I think therapy comes in clutch. I can talk to my therapist about my emotions and come home to my partner and still be strong and still be, you know, emotionally stable and all of that because I'm working on myself. So, like, personally, I think going to therapy is one of the more masculine things you can do because you're gaining these tools of like, I know how to stay stoic. And it's not this fake stoic. It's not like stoic and then I'm going to snap on someone. It's like, I'm truly gaining the skills to become stoic.
Yeah. I so appreciate that perspective of like saying it's the more like masculine thing you can do. What's interesting to me is I feel like I would say like part of the work that or something I think is so important is being able to navigate, okay, like how do I bring what I'm talking about in therapy home to my partner in a way that is like helpful and digestible, but also makes me feel heard and understood and validated. As I do feel like there's the stigma exists because it's been perpetuated not from men to men, but from women to men and like people to people in general. And I think what you said, like to be stoic in a relationship, I'm like, I feel like that is answering the question of like, that's the expectation.
Yeah.
Is for you to be stoic in the relationship when I think what you were saying before of like, there's overdoing it. Like you all, in any relationship, there's a balance of like leaning on that person and vulnerability, and your partner can't be like your sole emotional support. I think what you're saying too, like I can talk to my therapist is so important to have that outlet. I say in addition, like it's so important to be able to, in that outlet, learn, okay, for myself and my partner, how is it best for me to communicate what I'm feeling and thinking right now? It's interesting too, because I feel like I'd be curious to hear what your experience was like with this, but I have found too that when I work with men, oftentimes it's like, I want to fix it. I want to problem solve. It's like action oriented.
Yeah.
Like I want to fix it, I want to problem solve. And I feel like also having this space where like, that is not the expectation. Like
awareness more.
Yeah. And like reflection, self-discovery, understanding, depth, like you guys don't have, I mean, this is a generalization, but I'm wondering if you feel like you have other spaces outside of therapy to really do that.
I mean, I would say it depends on your friend group.
Okay.
Like, I feel like with my friends, we push each other, but we do it in a different way. Like, we do it by roasting each other.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
it's kind of like a harsh.
My phone's buzzing.
Yeah. It's a harsh experience, but like that's kind of how we do it. So it's like,
yeah.
Oh, dude, yeah, like I bet you're gonna start that YouTube channel. Then like 3 weeks later, like, dude, how's the YouTube channel going? When you know they didn't start it.
Yeah.
Like so, like kind of roasting in that way to bring self-awareness. Like, so there's that. But yeah, I mean, it and what you said about fixing things, it's funny because I was gonna chime in there and say, before you said that, I was gonna chime in and say, now if I'm being vulnerable with my partner or whatever, I want to have the fix right there. Like, so that's how I want to come to the issue. Like, hey, I'm feeling this way. What about this?
Yeah.
Because I don't just want to be complaining or venting, or like, I want to be like, hey, like, this is making me feel this way. What are your thoughts on this? So I want the fix.
Yeah. But it sounds like what you're saying is like do the emotional processing of it like in therapy.
Yeah. Or,
kind of navigate what my needs are and then bring my needs to my partner as well.
Exactly.
I'm not leaving out where the needs came from, like the emotional side of it.
Yes.
I'm just not like doing that work with my partner.
Right. I don't want to have any unnecessary dialogue with my partner that I can have cleared up by going to therapy, or like I want to be coming. And I guess where that comes from is just like, I don't want it to be an emotional conversation in the sense of when I feel like you're having emotional conversations, like they're just that, they're emotional. Like we're saying things that are emotional.
Yeah.
Where I would more like to have that emotional conversation where you could trigger me with like, hit me with a question that makes me go, oh, that's not true. Like that's not what it is.
Yeah. I'm curious though, in this situation, when you say emotional conversation, do you mean argument?
No,
okay.
More so just like if I say something and I don't even really know what I'm talking about, and then they ask me a question, I'm like, wait, like maybe I think it's one thing even. I'm just like writing these emotions.
Okay.
So not like an argument, but maybe more like it's not even an understanding that I have.
Yeah.
It's just like I feel this, so I'm coming to you with these emotions. Yeah. Before I even know what they are.
Yeah. No.
And now
100%.
we're trying to figure this out together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. I feel like being able to kind of navigate and understand and name what you're feeling in therapy and like process it and figure out where it's coming from. Like, am I feeling like, is it coming from a sense of deprivation? Is it coming from a sense of like overwhelm, whatever it may be. And then being able to come to your partner with that clarity is so helpful. I also think too that part of me is wondering about like how, what I was saying about like the kind of the Brené Brown example of like feeling like there's a requirement for us not to be vulnerable, the connection between that and what we're talking about of like, I feel like I have to be cleaned up and have everything named before I go to my partner. When I will say, like, I'd be curious if you took a group of men and a group of women, you asked them the same question, I'd be really curious how many women would say like they felt like they had to come in with a solution and be cleaned up first versus men. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not saying that in a leading way. I genuinely would be interested though if there's a difference there and like feeling like there's a pressure to kind of, have the answer.
And like a lot of it, whether we want to admit it or not, it's probably down to like biological attraction. Like I can see how as a woman, you wouldn't want to be with a man who like doesn't really have it figured out. So therefore, like on the flip side, if I want to be with a a specific woman, like I better have my shit together and come prepared.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, yeah, there's probably a natural instinct of like, I want to fix it, whatever. But it's also like, I know as a man, like I need to have a certain level of my shit together. Not that women don't, but it's just like traditionally that has kind of been the role.
Yeah.
And it's probably baked into our minds at some point, whatever level that might be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just like, I don't even know what I'm trying to say is like, I don't know if a woman would be attracted to a man that like doesn't figure it out.
Yeah. Part of me wonders too for like, because I'm like that 100%, like you want to be able to, I feel like there's a difference between being vulnerable and not having your shit together.
Yes.
You know, like being.
And that's where I think the fix is.
Yeah, exactly. I think like, I feel like we're saying the same thing, but like, I'm thinking about like vulnerability, because you can have your shit together and be incredibly vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think therapy helps you get to that place of like, can I navigate what I'm feeling and not come in and kind of like, coming in hot all the time with my partner, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Coming in hot.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I meant by emotional is like,
okay, gotcha.
We're just swinging right in this roller coaster.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. It's like, I haven't even navigated where this is coming from or where, like, you know, how it happened and like what it means. And yeah, totally.
So, and there's some like very, you know, I mean, on Instagram, there's a lot of men that go to therapy that are like very raw, like Aaron Rodgers, like Tom Brady, all these popular athletes that are about as masculine as you can be.
Of course,
they've been in therapy for 15 years, like way ahead of when most men started.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I actually am hoping that we can kind of like remove the I don't even know if this is where like genderization of therapy, because I do feel like there's a lot of conversation on social media right now about like therapy being feminized or not, and like even asking what about therapy for men?
Yeah.
I feel like that's part of the stigma is like people's belief that like, oh, it's for women. It's like that's not the case at all. It's for people. And I think that the examples that you gave are like it's so important for people to witness that, because I think it's like it's not a gendered experience. Obviously, your identity as male, female, or non-binary is going to show up in the work.
Right.
But
it's not like a requirement to get in.
No, exactly. It's not like, and that's also not, and none of our training is like, and if it's a woman, do this. And if it's a man, do that. Like, that is not something that, there's like feminist theory and such when you're working with women and everything. But like, I would say psychotherapy as a whole, it's for humans. It's about the human experience.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. So thoughts on therapy talk being used as an excuse to be a bad person, or not, I don't know if bad person, but like to get out of shit you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Oh, like here's one for me.
Okay.
When someone makes plans with you and then they bail like the hour before, even though you've had these plans for 2 weeks, and then they're just like, I need to take care of myself and have a night in.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't get that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this happens a lot. And they can just use buzzwords like, these are my boundaries. These are blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also disrespectful.
Totally.
When you're doing that to someone who cleared their Saturday night.
Yeah.
And now we're doing this an hour before.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that. I actually do think you use the word like excuse. I think that's happening a lot. You know, one thing, I think it's great that people are taking on therapeutic language. I will say that, like, I think, you know, there's always like, in a beautiful thing, there's always like a thorn. I think what you're talking about is like the thorn in it. I have like shared this with clients too, like in sessions, is that like our mental health, though there's aspects of it that we actually may not control, and there's external factors that we can't control that impact it, it is still our responsibility.
Yeah.
And also I would say like with that responsibility comes like acting in accordance to your values with that. It doesn't mean you're not going to cancel, but like owning that it is disrespectful to cancel last minute. And like, that doesn't mean you're never going to do it and you're going to people please to not be disrespectful. But like, you know, I think that we have to like take on that responsibility. Now, in other words, like I think people even misuse boundaries. Like,
yeah. Okay, let's talk
that's
about
like
that.
the biggest buzz. There's actually, it's funny as therapists, we've noticed, especially with like TikTok and Instagram.
Yes.
There's like therapy buzzwords every couple of years. So I remember when I was in grad school, the big one was gaslighting.
Oh, gaslighting.
Yeah, that was the big word.
Narcissist.
Yes, that was right after. So it was gaslighting for a while, narcissist. People, I also feel like there was like people were throwing around like neurodivergent, like, oh, my neurodivergent brain. Like there's always been these words and they almost become like trend words, you know? And
Everyone
right now
has autism now. You don't have to comment on that, but
yeah, no, actually I have a sibling with autism. So seeing that on TikTok actually very like, it was impactful.
Yeah.
Like, I think pro in that people are learning and it's, you know, are aware and, you know, are getting services and help that they need. But at the same time, that it's also, I'm like, you guys are self-diagnosing
yes,
when you don't.
It's the self-diagnosed thing.
I'm like, you have to be careful with that because there's any symptom that they're listing on those. I'm like, that could be autism. It also can be a list of other things.
Yeah,
and
it's like your room's dirty.
Yeah.
And it's like they're self-diagnosing. It's like,
it could
slow
be
down.
Yeah, it could be everything. I also I think as a therapist too, get really hesitant on social media sometimes because those videos that are like, if you have boom, 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 you have X, Y, and Z diagnosis. I'm like, that's really dangerous to put out there. And I totally understand wanting to create education and awareness about it, but I'm like, that also could be a variety of different things. And each person is so unique.
Yeah, you need to spend some time with someone.
Yes, and really understand exactly. But circling back to, I think the current one is boundaries.
Yeah.
And like folks will be like, well, I'm setting a boundary with that. And I'm like, it sounds like you're more setting an ultimatum than a boundary with that. And I'm like, an ultimatum is not a boundary. A boundary is something that it's an action that you will take, not the other person.
Okay.
Right. So like, they'll be like, well, I'm setting a boundary that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm ending the relationship. Like, that's not a boundary.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that can be dangerous too, because you're naming things like ultimatums as boundaries, and because it's got this like therapeutic lens to it, people think that it's like impervious
like a threat
to,
right away. It's like, oh shit.
It's like, okay, well, I can't argue with that because that's a therapeutic term and this is their mental health. But I'm like, no, it's also coming up right now. I'm not a parent, but I work a lot with parents with like gentle parenting.
Oh.
Everyone's talking about like the difference between like authoritative and gentle parenting. And like, I feel like there's always something in this field that people attach to and kind of misuse.
Yeah.
But yeah. And the gaslighting one too, you saw that a lot. Like someone would be disagreeing and say like, have a different opinion. And they'd be like, you're gaslighting me. And I'm like, having a difference of opinion is not gaslighting.
Yeah.
And gaslighting is also really serious. It's like very abusive. So if,
that's the thing is all of these things are serious.
Yeah.
Like, but
very true.
It makes you like less, or it like devalues the seriousness when somebody very normal that you know is saying they have autism and they've never been diagnosed. And yeah, like I recently spoke with a therapist that said she's having a lot of teens coming in telling that they're like, well, I feel awkward at school. And it's like, yeah, you're 14.
Yeah.
You have braces, you're walking funny because you're growing. There's a lot of things like I'm pretty sure we all felt a little awkward at 14.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't mean like, and it's just, you're like, you don't want that in your head because it's,
yeah.
I mean, even with anxiety, I remember there was a time when my anxiety was really bad and it's like, okay, I have anxiety, but then you can almost lean on that as a crutch. Like, well, I can't do that. I have anxiety. I can get out of this. I have anxiety. And that's not really an ideal way to live. It's just like blaming stuff on our diagnosis that might not even be not even diagnosed by a doctor.
Yeah. Well, also what you're saying about anxiety, I mean, that's also like the more you're avoiding in life, the worse the anxiety is going to get. And also like, I feel like we call it like anxiety avoidance, right? I'm avoiding things due to feeling anxious about it.
Yeah.
And in like a therapeutic treatment environment, our encouragement would be to like do it anyway.
Like expose yourself.
Expose yourself, exactly. Like exposure therapy. So like absolutely. And I think what you were saying before about like seeing things online and then like kind of getting in your head, and like I feel like whether it's a diagnosis or even just someone sharing kind of like any sort of like mental health perspective or like one-liner, people take it to heart. And I think it can be so helpful. Like that's the thing. It's such a balance because so much of it is so helpful. I mean, I create content online for it and I'm like hoping that it's helpful. But there's also the flip side of like, you can get in your head and then you're like, oh my God, do I have this? Do I have that? Or like, is this healthy? Is this unhealthy?
Yeah.
It can kind of take you on a spiral.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's both positive and negative because you can get a glimpse into therapy and what it could do. And like, wow, that really connects with me. Like whatever she just said, that really makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Or there's creators that are probably 17 doing the exact same content in their own twist. And it's like, well, they're probably not qualified to. Yeah. And that's, I mean, they're 17. What are they going to do? It's not their fault. Like, they're just kind of exploring the internet, trying to have a popular page. But we don't know the difference if it's just a meme or something.
Yeah, I think it's also hard too because there's, I think, a huge benefit in people sharing their stories. Because I think that breeds what we were talking about earlier of like the vulnerability. Like I think it can be very helpful to show what you're feeling and show the more difficult parts of life or the challenges that you're having and navigating each day because it helps us feel less alone. And loneliness is a huge like contributing factor to mental health. Huge, like more so than I think anyone's giving it credit for. And so I think there is a benefit there of like shared experience and feeling less lonely in that. But at the same time, even if you're having a shared experience from a mental health perspective, it doesn't mean it's coming from the same roots of that tree, kind of going back to that of like, it could be coming from a very different place or because of the environment, because of your own, neurological makeup, whatever it is. And so I think that's kind of too where in this space in particular, especially with content online, it gets murky. Yeah.
And it's one more thing about this subject. It's also, it can be dangerous because when you're consuming content like this, you almost get the thrill of going to therapy or improving yourself without actually doing the hard work. It's like, really I just heard this really good quote. And like, now I can, if it was me, I could be like, now I can say this on my podcast and people are going to think that I'm emotionally, like you can learn to speak the language before feeling any sort of way, or before doing any work. You can just learn these bars to throw out and sounds fire.
100%. It reminds me of, it's like thinking of like, I could study acting and read every book about acting, but until I'm performing, I'm not, I haven't acted, right?
And you could give acting advice on Instagram. Because you can just read it.
Because I read it. Exactly. But I'm not doing the work, right? But it's so funny you mentioned that because that was something when you asked me earlier about what is therapy, such a core component of therapy is the human relationship, is the relationship with your therapist. So we were talking about like the friendship before too and the challenge. And I think people are thinking now, whether it's through content or books, I know a lot of and it's so easy to get addicted to self-development books. Like I have been there. I'm a therapist and when I was in grad school, I read like every self-help book you can possibly imagine. And it was for work, but at the same time, like it becomes addicting. And then you're like, I am becoming the highest version of myself. But
and you haven't done shit.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't done anything. And I think too, like in the therapeutic environment, like I think people are starting to believe that they can therapize themselves. And you can't. You can't therapize yourself as much as you may want to. Like a core part of therapy is having that relationship and that relational dynamic. And so much happens in that relationship. I don't remember what the stat is. I really wish I could remember now. But in grad school, they would tell us like a huge portion of whether or not therapy was going to be successful was rooted in the connectivity and the nature of the relationship between the client and therapist. Like I would say, like I believe it's like more than half. Yeah. So if you don't have that relationship, I mean, you're getting that other, let's call it, I don't remember the exact number, but let's call it 40% or whatever, 30%. You're not going to be able to do the work with just that 30, 40%.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of what you were saying about the self-help and how it feels good. And we'll just cut this if you don't want this like attached to your name. But my friend, he jokes about like mental masturbation. And that's what you're doing when you're reading self-help or watching. It's like you're mentally masturbating, but you're not doing anything. It's just this like very, I don't know, like he also likes to say if self-help books worked, why are there so many?
That's a really good point too.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah, that is a really good point. That's a really good point.
And we know what to do. Like whatever.
Yeah.
For the most part, we know what to do. Like we're probably not. You'll get much more. Personally, I believe you'll get much more benefit from having conversations that are personalized to you than just reading books that are.
Yeah.
Not that you shouldn't read, but you know what I'm saying.
No, 100%. And I think what you just spoke on about like the personal conversation piece is that like we are all walking histories with like so much that contributes to who we are as humans, and our personalities are all so unique and so different.
Yeah.
And our needs are so unique and so different. And I feel like when the books, like when you're reading or the content even, is generalized.
Yep.
It's generalized. And so therapy helps you if you know what's going on, it's like, okay, well, how does this apply to you in your life, in your history, your relationships? And that conversation, you can't get that out of a book because there's no book that knows you.
Yep.
So, yeah. 100%. That's funny about that. How he kind of conceptualizes that. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's obviously a few barriers to people getting into therapy, whether that's kind of on their own or, you know, maybe financially. So specifically when it comes to financial barriers, are there certain resources that people could take advantage of to access therapy?
Yeah. No, I know that's a huge concern, is the accessibility to it. So it's interesting. There's a lot of practices will do this model, but like I remember when I was in grad school, you have to intern for a couple years before you can get licensed and all of that. And you do it for college credit, which that's a whole systemic thing I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole today, but it has its own issues. But the reality is that's how those systems operate right now. I think a lot of people are hesitant to see like interns or associate level therapists because they're like, oh, I want a fully licensed therapist. But I would argue too that like it's a very affordable way to get treatment. And when you're early on in your career, you are like hungry. Like, you are keeping up to date with like everything, all the continuing ed, like everything that's happening in the therapy world, all the resources, like, and you're it's like when you start a new job and you're like really in it and like you're like so like, you know, zoned in and like you're like giving 100%. Like I feel like a lot of therapists who are starting out are doing that. So I would say like I would encourage people not to be shy about that. And the training it's robust in every capacity. So
and
like,
there's a supervisor.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And they're being supervised, so they're not like gonna go rogue, you know. Well, hopefully, you know, we're all human beings, so you can't, it's generalization. But oftentimes that's a really great way to access affordable therapy. And then there are therapists out there that take insurance. I know it's a rare find these days. It feels like it's a rare find, I should say. But I take insurance. I'm paneled on some, not others, so it's just dependent. But there are therapists out there who are able to financially and are willing to take insurance. It might just take a little bit of work. I also think now too, if you're open to virtual therapy, you have access to your entire state of therapists. Like it's not just so if you need a lower cost therapy and you live in Austin, which is a high cost of living, and therapists who are charging out of pocket are going to have higher rates. But you can see a therapist throughout Texas.
Right.
If you want in-person work, it's a little bit different. Not Austin therapists. I won't get mad at me for saying that. Yeah. As an Austin therapist, I'm like, oh, maybe I should.
You're taking it away from everybody.
Well, but at the same time, like affordability is a huge component, and I mean, this obviously could lead into a whole healthcare issue, right? But yeah, so I'd say like being open to working with like trainee students, associate level therapists is a great option, and then giving yourself the time and space to really do the research to finding a clinician that is in network can be really helpful. I also think people don't know their out of network benefits.
I don't know that I do.
So like you're in a lot of insurances, you have out of network benefits. So even though you're paying out of pocket for your therapy sessions, you can submit super bills and get reimbursed for your sessions. And like some out-of-network plans will give you like 60 to 80% back.
Wow.
Yeah. So definitely like call the number on the back of your insurance card, ask them. I have like a list of questions on my website that I tell people to ask their insurance company to insure. But yeah, a lot of patients will come thinking like, oh, this isn't affordable. And I'll be like, check with your insurance company, because if you have out-of-network benefits, you might be paying only a portion of this for sessions. And they come back and they're like, yeah, they're covering like 80%, which is amazing. So also check that you have out-of-network benefits. And if you do, utilize them.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I know when you're feeling down and all, like that can seem so overwhelming. I know it was for me. And like, therapists are busy and sometimes you can't see them for 4 weeks. And that feels like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
But you know, I would encourage, if you feel that you would benefit from therapy, to try and push through that, because it's a pain. Yeah, it sucks calling around, but long term, it's such a beneficial thing. So
yeah, that's actually been a really hard thing too. I think hearing that from other people as a therapist, of like, people didn't get back to me or I didn't hear. I mean, that breaks my heart, because it is a vulnerable thing to do, and it's also like, a lot of what you're saying, like if you're really having a hard time, like the effort it takes to do it is a lot. But there are therapists out there who have availability, who are able to help. So, but I do, when I hear that, it really like breaks my heart. It makes my heart heavy.
Yeah, it can be tough. I know when I was trying to find one, I think I had 1 out of 6 respond to me.
Wow.
And I know it was in Kansas City. It was kind of like late COVID, and I know it was busy and all, but it was hard to get in anywhere.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that, because even if you don't have space, it's like the response.
Right.
You gotta respond.
Like you're not just waiting.
Yeah.
But, well, cool. Let's end it on kind of a fun clickbaity one.
Okay.
What are 3 things that people can do to improve their life?
Please don't do that to me.
Just one thing that people could like implement in their life that's fairly easy. You think could improve?
Absolutely. It's kind of a vague general one, but it's so important, I would say, is reflection. Like, spend 15 minutes a day reflecting on it doesn't have to be reflecting on like it's this deep, intense thing. It can be reflecting on how you spent your day. It can be reflecting on a relationship that you have. But oftentimes we really only reflect when there's something big that happens in our life, like a big win, a big loss, a challenge that we're trying to overcome. And there's research at I think it's in like Harvard Med's journal about the impacts of like even just 15 minutes a day of reflecting, and how much better people felt and how much more productive people were. I can send you like the exact stat, but and that's pretty amazing. Like I think it was like 25% better. I don't want to misinform, but which is a huge percentage, and it happens over time. Like this is something like with anything else, like it's a little action you can take each day, but the benefits that it yields long term is immense.
Yeah.
So I would say like that's the biggest thing, is to just spend time with active reflection. And I think there's a lot right now, like another buzzword and buzz action is journaling, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be you just like while you're on your commute, like be like intentional about it. Like spend 15 minutes and think about like, okay, like where am I in my life? What do I want? Like, how am I showing up with my friends? Am I showing up in my relationships? How am I feeling? Like reflect on feeling, like what makes me feel better? What helps? What hurts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I've been doing recently is and it's kind of ironic because it's when I feel like I'm in flow and then I snap out of it, I'm like, oh, what was I doing? I want to think of those things when I was really in flow.
Yeah.
And when I was feeling good, and then think of things when I wasn't, and kind of know like, oh, I should do more of these things and less of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you just said like you're reflecting on your flow states.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're doing. Like
I know, that's what's so funny about it. Is like,
but I think that's helpful. Is I think it's funny. I do this therapeutic work called DBT, and one of the key core parts of mindfulness is getting into the flow state. Is like fully becoming one with what you're doing. You're immersed, and you get into that, like, it almost feels like a runner's high kind of feeling. Yeah,
I love that feeling.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's also if you can get into that state, it's immensely beneficial for your mental health.
Yeah,
immensely. But in order to really be consistent and understand, you have to reflect on what brings me into that. How long was I there for? What did I feel like when I was in it? Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. Yeah, and that's basically the point of therapy is reflection and awareness.
Yeah,
so.
It's very true. Self-awareness, self-efficacy, all that good stuff.
Well, cool. How can people find you?
You can find me online. My website's gmltherapy.com. You can find me on Instagram. It's at gmltherapy. Or if you just type my name, Grace Lawton, into Google, you'll find me.
Cool.
So,
well, thank you so much. I think this is a great message to get out. And I appreciate you coming on.
Of course. Thank you.